It was the second day of May, and the rain had not been promised. Frederica Hartwell had walked out from Park Street under a sky the colour of clean linen, and by the time she reached the western corner of Hyde Park, the sky had turned to pewter, and was beginning, with little ceremony, to come apart. Her own umbrella was at the bottom of the area steps with a snapped rib, crushed under the heel of a stout man getting down from a Bond Street omnibus the morning before. She had Cecily's milliner to reach by 3:30, bonnet ribbons to choose, a dressmaker's bill to settle, and 48 pence in her reticule that needed to last until Friday. She had not, in short, planned to be caught in the rain. By the time she reached the lamppost at the corner of Park Lane, the rain had become the kind that climbs into the seams of a travelling pelisse and finds the slight of the back at once. Her dark, coiled hair clung damp at her temple. Her gloves were ruined. Her boots were already taking water. The wind had turned northerly and was pulling the rain sideways into the doorways. Propped against the iron base of the lamppost, evidently forgotten, stood a tall black silk umbrella. It had a slim Malacca handle and a small brass tip, and it had been opened recently. The silk still held the dark sheen of fresh rain, and then set down by someone who, in the dripping hurry of finding a chair, had walked off without it. There was no name on the handle that she could see. There was no servant beside it. There was, for the length of 3 breaths, no one in the immediate world but Frederica, and the rain, and the umbrella. She did consider it. She considered, in the cold, practical fragment of her mind that had managed her aunt's household accounts since she was 16, that the milliner's was 4 streets away, and the rain would not stop for her. She considered that whoever had left a perfectly good umbrella in a public street had not been thinking kindly of his own possessions. She would return it the moment she discovered who he was, with apologies and the cost of a hired chair if necessary. She lifted the umbrella, opened it, and stepped out from under the lamppost with 3 small, purposeful strides. She had taken 3 more strides when a voice said, very civilly, somewhere behind her left shoulder, "Madam, I am extremely sorry to inconvenience you, but I believe you have stolen my umbrella." Frederica stopped where she was on the wet pavement. The umbrella stopped above her. The rain continued behind her. A coach went past in the road, throwing up grey water at the curb. She turned. A tall young gentleman, hatless, stood 3 paces back under the awning of a closed pastry cook's. His plain, dark blue coat, well cut, was damp at the shoulder. His tarnished bronze hair, the colour of an old penny, was dark with rain and disordered at the crown. He had level grey eyes set wide above sharp, clean cheekbones, and a mouth grave that had not, she suspected, originated grave. He was, she registered in the cold, ringing instant of mortification, perhaps the handsomest young man she had seen in her life. He had no umbrella. He had no hat. He had not, plainly, planned to be caught in the rain either. He had also been waiting under the awning for, perhaps, a minute, while a small, dark-haired person in a damp, grey travelling pelisse stole his umbrella from the lamppost not 8 feet away, and then walked off with it. "Oh," said Frederica. She said it once. The word had a small, dignified shape in her mouth, and did not sound at all the way she felt. "Oh," she said again. He inclined his head, a courteous half-bow, correct in the rain, and waited. She stepped back to him at once, closed the umbrella as neatly as she could manage with cold fingers, and held it out across the pavement to him with both gloved hands. "Sir, I beg your pardon. I had no idea. There was no one near it, and the rain... I have no excuse. I should not have. I am extremely sorry." He looked at her. He looked at the umbrella. He did not take it. "Madam," he said, in a voice that was lower and quieter than the rain, "you are extremely wet. I have 2 streets to walk. You, I would guess, have rather more. I would be a remarkably ungentlemanly creature if I took it back." "You are already extremely wet yourself." "I am at present moderately wet. I am about to be sensibly wet. I shall recover." His mouth pulled a fraction at the corner, perfectly straight again before it was quite a smile. whereas you, madam, are going to ruin a very respectable bonnet." "It is not a respectable bonnet. It is a practical bonnet." "That is far worse," he said gravely. "Practicality should always be kept dry." Frederica was not, by nature, a person who blushed at strangers in the street. 13 years as a country attorney's eldest daughter, and 13 more as an aunt's unsalaried companion, had given her a face that did not betray her in front of milliners or hackney drivers. The colour now climbing into her cheeks, she registered with distant astonishment, as if it had nothing to do with her. "Sir," she said, "I would be very glad to walk you to your door under the umbrella. It is the smallest reparation I can—" "Madam," he said, "if I walk under that umbrella with you for 2 streets, you will be obliged to walk back alone in this rain afterwards. Take it. Use it. I shall consider myself reimbursed by the reflection that I have done one useful thing this afternoon." She tried to give it back to him the 3rd time. He took 2 steps back, into the worst of the rain, and put his hands carefully behind him. The rain ran down the side of his face. He was looking at her quite steadily. "You are being absurd," said Frederica, who in the whole of her life had never said that to a strange gentleman in the street. "I am being," he said, "approximately as absurd as the situation requires." A hackney chair came rattling along the curb with its dripping bearers. He turned, raised a hand, and stopped it. "Where, madam?" "Conduit Street, sir, but—" "Conduit Street," he said pleasantly to the head-bearer. "Carefully, if you please." He turned back to Frederica and offered his hand to help her in. She did not take it. She handed him the umbrella instead. He took it this time, because she had crossed her arms over her ruined gloves and given him a stern look that, when she heard it described later by Cecily Mainwaring, she did not entirely recognize. "Sir," she said, halfway into the chair, "I shall return this to you. I should be very obliged if you would give me a direction." He considered her for a moment in the rain. "Forster," he said. "Number 23, Grosvenor Square." "Mr. Forster, I am extremely sorry to have stolen your umbrella." "Madam," he said, opening it again over her at the door of the chair as the bearers lifted. "If every theft were committed with this much remorse, the magistrates of this country would have very little to do." He pressed the umbrella into her hand and closed the door of the chair. The chair was lifted. The bearers swung into the rain. Through the rain-streaked window, Frederica saw a tall, hatless figure cross the curb toward Park Lane, with his coat collar turned up, walking unhurried, as if rain were a small problem he had agreed to. He did not look back. Conduit Street to Park Street was a long, wet, mortified ride. By the time she reached the milliners, late, dripping, holding a black silk umbrella that did not belong to her, Frederica had decided 2 things. First, she would not, under any circumstances, tell Cecily Mainwaring. Second, she would return the umbrella the next afternoon, in dry weather, with a properly written note of apology, and forget the entire matter at once. She did not, of course, achieve either resolution. By the time she was sitting in the milliner's back parlour, with her dripping pelisse on a hook and her cold fingers around a cup of tea, Cecily Mainwaring had already extracted half the story by the simple device of staring at the closed umbrella by the door. Cecily was 19, and freshly out and entirely too clever to be in her first season. She had her mother's quick, dark eyes and her father's wide, warm laugh, and had spent 3 months doing precisely what her mother wished while making, almost imperceptibly, gentle satire of all of it. "Whose umbrella," said Cecily, "have you stolen, Freddie?" "I did not steal anything," said Frederica. "I borrowed it from a lamp-post." "Borrowed it from a lamp-post," repeated Cecily delightedly. "Borrowed it from a lamp-post. Freddie, tell me everything." "There is nothing to tell. He was extremely civil. I shall return it tomorrow." "He? A gentleman? A gentleman who has given a Conduit Street stranger his only umbrella in a downpour." "It is perfectly possible," said Frederica, who was rapidly losing ground. That he had a second umbrella at home. Freddie, what was he like? Frederica considered the rim of her teacup. She considered the kind firelight in the milliner's grate. She considered, against her will, the rain on the side of a clean cheekbone, and the correct half-bow under an awning, and a voice that had said, very low, that practicality should always be kept dry. He was extremely tall, she said, and his coat was very wet. Excellent, said Cecily, who was 19, and had heard worse stories than this in the same parlour from her own friends. An extremely tall man, with a very wet coat. I shall make a note of it. Have you a name? Mr. Forster, number 23, Grosvenor Square. There was a small pause. Cecily set her teacup down on the saucer with the careful precision she had been taught at the age of 7 by her governess, and had been employing ever since whenever something was about to be very entertaining. Freddie, she said. Grosvenor Square, number 23. Yes. My darling Freddie, that is not Mr. Forster's house. That is Westbridge House. Frederica looked up. It belongs to the Duke of Westbridge, said Cecily, who is 26 and inherited it 6 months ago, when his elder brother was lost at sea coming home from Lisbon, and is presently, my mother tells me, the most pursued young man in London. You have stolen the Duke of Westbridge's umbrella. I have not stolen it. You have walked off with the Duke of Westbridge's umbrella in the rain, and the Duke has given you his only chair and walked back through Park Lane without a hat. Freddie, you have ruined me. I shall be an old woman in a corner saying, my cousin Freddie once stole a Duke's umbrella. Cecily. Do not Cecily me. I have not laughed properly in 3 weeks. May I come with you tomorrow to return it? You may not. I shall sit in the chair across the street. I shall pretend to read. You shall do no such thing. I shall return it alone. With a perfectly civil note. He will return it to a footman. He will not see me. The matter will be ended. Cecily was watching her with the bright, unembarrassed interest of a young woman who had been bored for 2 months. Freddie, she said, I have known you since I was 12. I have not, in those 7 years, ever seen you blush at a milliner's tea-tray. Frederica did not answer this, because she did not have an answer. She drank her tea. She chose Cecily's bonnet ribbons, a soft moss green and a paler primrose. She settled with the milliner. She walked Cecily home through the streets, which had stopped raining and were now bright and clean and full of light puddles, under the Duke of Westbridge's umbrella with the brass tip catching the late afternoon sun. She did not, of course, sleep particularly well. She left the Park Street house at 3 the next afternoon under the same umbrella, now perfectly dry and reverently folded, with a note in her reticule that she had written 4 times over. The note said, Sir, I return your umbrella with my warmest apologies for yesterday's misadventure, and with my thanks for your great kindness in the rain. I shall not occupy more of your time than is necessary to deliver it. Believe me, with much regret for the inconvenience caused, your obedient servant, F. Hartwell. It was, she thought, a correct note. It admitted everything and demanded nothing. The footman would carry the umbrella up the stairs. The Duke, if he ever read the note, would crumple it onto a salver and forget her name within the hour. 23 Grosvenor Square was a great pale stone house with a black iron railing and a broad, clean step, 2 trimmed bay trees and green-painted tubs at the door, and the brass knocker polished to the brightness of a new shilling. The sky was the high, clean blue of late spring. She had only to walk up 3 steps and hand the umbrella to the footman. She walked up the 3 steps. She lifted the knocker. In the moment before she let it fall, she smoothed the cuff of her left glove with her right thumb, a small habit she had had since she was 16, of steadying her hand before she did something she did not, in her heart, wish to do. The knocker fell once, neatly. The door was opened, quickly enough that she suspected the man had heard her step, by a tall, thin, silver-haired butler, with the expressionless, courteous face of a man who had been politely letting in the difficult relations of dukes for 35 years. "Madam." "Good afternoon," said Frederica. I have come to return this umbrella to His Grace. I believe it is his. I shall not trouble you further. If you would be so good as to hand him this note." "Madam," said the butler, with the smallest dip of his head, "if you would be good enough to step into the hall. His Grace asked particularly that you should not be turned away if you came." Frederica stood quite still on the broad, clean step, with the umbrella in one hand and the note in the other. "Madam?" "I am very sorry," she said. "Did you say that His Grace had particularly asked—" "That you should not be turned away, madam, if you would be so good." She stepped, somehow, into the hall. It was a tall, pale hall, with a black and white marble floor, and a wide, soft-carpeted stair rising at the back, the air cool and smelling of beeswax and white narcissus. She was offered a gold silk chair. She did not sit. She stood with the umbrella and the note in her gloved hands and watched the stair. Then she heard a step, perfectly even, perfectly unhurried. She turned. The Duke of Westbridge was coming down. He was dressed for the morning in a plain dark coat and a pale buff waistcoat, and the loose ribboned cravat of a country gentleman who had no calls to make until 5. His tarnished bronze hair was perfectly dry. He was, she registered with the unworthy clutch of yesterday's mortification, exactly as handsome as she remembered. He saw her. He saw her in the second gold chair's vicinity, and in his face there was a particular movement. Not surprise. He had known perfectly well who would be in his hall this afternoon. That she could only have called pleasure. "Miss Hartwell." "Your Grace?" She did not curtsy, because she was holding an umbrella and a note. She did, somehow, manage to bow her head a little over the umbrella. I have come to return this." She held it out. "It is yours. I should not have taken it. I am extremely sorry. I had no idea." He reached out and took the umbrella from her, courteously, with both hands, as if it were an offering, and set it gently against the side of the table beside the bowl of narcissus. "Thank you," he said. "I had hoped he would come." "Your Grace, I did not know yesterday that you were that I was a duke. That you were not Mr. Forster." "I am Mr. Forster," he said gravely. "It is also a thing I am. It is only that I am one or two further things in addition." She looked at him in the cool light of the hall and did not know what to do with her face. "You gave me a false name," she said. "I gave you a true name. I gave you the smallest of my names. There was a chair waiting. I should otherwise have stood in the road being announced to you in a downpour. Miss Hartwell, would you step into the morning room? It is too cold a place to apologize in. There is a fire." There was no possible refusal she could have made that would not have been ruder than walking out of the house. She stepped into the morning room. The morning room had 3 tall sash windows, a low fire, and 2 wing chairs by the grate. There was a writing desk with a half-finished letter in a clean, upright hand. There were no women's things in the room at all. He stood with his back to the fire until she had chosen a chair. He sat only after she did. He had beautiful, unshowy manners, of the kind that come from a long, quiet lifetime of them. "Miss Hartwell." "Your Grace?" "May I ask you one perfectly impertinent question?" She inclined her head. "How long," he said, "did you spend writing that note?" She felt the color come back into her cheeks. She looked at the note, still in her gloved hand, and laid it on the table between them, with as much dignity as she could manage. 4 times, she said. "I had thought it was at least 3. The 4th is the perfectly straight one." "Your Grace." "Miss Hartwell, I shall not tease you. May I tell you why I asked Burroughs to admit you, against every house custom I have inherited?" "If you wish." "Because it occurred to me, he said, between the lamp-post and the corner of Brook Street, that I had given my umbrella to a stranger, and that I had not the slightest right to expect to see her again. And then it occurred to me, between Brook Street and Grosvenor Square, that I should rather like to. There was a particular silence. "Your Grace," she said, in a voice she did not entirely recognize, "I do not think that is quite a proper thing to say to me." "I am aware," he said quietly. "I did not, in fact, plan to say it. I had planned to ask you politely after your aunt and offer you a cup of tea. The morning would then have gone, I believe, as you intended. Forgive me. It is the first morning in 6 months in which I have spoken without the assistance of 3 counsellors and an attorney." She looked at him then. In the clean light of the morning room, he was not the perfectly mannered, handsome young gentleman of the rain. He was a young man with quiet, grey eyes, a clean-cleaved cheekbone, and a faint shadow at the temple where the rain had dried. He looked, she thought, with a sudden clutch under the breastbone, extremely tired. "Your Grace, I am Miss Frederica Hartwell, niece of Mrs. Olivia Hartwell of Hartwell Cottage, Wiltshire. We are guests of Lady Mannering at Park Street. Her daughter Cecily is having her first season, and I have come up with my aunt to help chaperone her. I am 27 years old. I have no fortune. I have no acquaintance in London beyond Park Street. I am not, Your Grace, the kind of young woman who is admitted to morning rooms in Grosvenor Square." "I do not see," he said gravely, "why the kind of young woman who is admitted to a morning room in Grosvenor Square is to be defined by any rule but mine." "Your Grace, Miss Hartwell, I should very much like to call on your aunt and Lady Mannering at Park Street. Will you tell me at what hour I may, without scandalizing any of you, present myself?" She considered him for a long moment. He sat extremely still and let her consider him. "My aunt," she said at last, "is at home tomorrow afternoon, from 3 until 5, Lady Mainwaring at all hours she pleases. I cannot speak for them. I can only tell you the form of the matter." "That is what I asked for," he said. "Thank you." She stood. He stood. They walked back into the hall together. Burrows, the silver-haired butler, stood at the door as if he had not moved since she came in. "Burrows," said the Duke. "Miss Hartwell's chair, if you please." "Your Grace, there is no chair. I walked." He looked at her in the cool light of the hall. "Then," he said, "I shall walk you to Park Street." "You shall do nothing of the sort." "I shall, at least, see you to the corner of the square." "Your Grace, Miss Hartwell, there has been quite enough adventure in this conversation. Allow me one perfectly ordinary kindness. I shall not walk further than the curb of Brook Street. You may put me back into my house at that point with a clear conscience." She stood for a moment in the cool, pale hall. "Very well," she said. "To the curb of Brook Street." To the curb of Brook Street. He took up a tall beaver hat from the side table, not the same hatlessness of yesterday, and set it on his head, and offered her his arm. She, after a small steadying breath she did not intend to be visible, put her gloved hand on the inside of his sleeve. They walked out of Westbridge House together into the bright, clean afternoon. He did not, she registered, attempt to make conversation. He walked her at the correct distance for a young woman and a stranger, and he spoke once only, to ask whether she would prefer to cross the square through the gravel walk or to go round on the pavement. She said the pavement. He said yes. At the curb of Brook Street he stopped, lifted his hat, bowed. "Miss Hartwell." "Your Grace." "I shall call upon your aunt tomorrow at 3. "Your Grace, I am not at all certain it would be Miss Hartwell. I shall call upon your aunt. If she is not at home to me, I shall, of course, accept that. If she is at home, I should be grateful to take tea. I shall bring my own umbrella." "Your Grace." 3, he said. Park Street. He lifted his hat once more, gravely. He turned. He walked back across the corner of the square to his own door. He did not look back at her. Frederica walked the rest of the way back to Park Street very slowly. Her aunt would, she thought, almost certainly have one of her headaches by morning. Cecily was in the drawing-room window when she came in. Cecily had been in the drawing-room window for an hour, and she had had quite enough time to see Frederica walk up to the door of Park Street on the arm of a tall young gentleman in a beaver hat at the curb of Brook Street. "Freddie," said Cecily, before Frederica had quite shut the door. "Cecily, I've done a perfectly ordinary errand. I returned an umbrella." "You walked back from Grosvenor Square," said Cecily, "with the Duke of Westbridge?" "To the curb of Brook Street." "To the curb of Brook Street," said Cecily, in tones of religious reverence. "Freddie, Freddie, he is calling on Mamma tomorrow at 3, is he not?" "He is calling on my aunt." "My darling Freddie," said Cecily Mannering, who had not laughed properly in 3 weeks. "This is the best thing that has ever happened in this house." At 3 the next afternoon, a tall, plain, dark blue carriage pulled up at Park Street, and the Duke stepped down with a slim, white-papered parcel and a perfectly respectable umbrella. Lady Mannering received him with the composed, cordial brightness of a woman who had been told an hour before that a duke was coming to tea, and had spent the intervening hour rearranging 4 chairs. Mrs. Hartwell received him with the cool composure of a country attorney's widow who had been to London once before, in 1808, on her wedding journey, and was determined not to be put out of countenance by anyone. Frederica received him with a steady hand and a cool cheek, in the dove-grey morning gown that was the best she owned, her dark hair coiled at the nape under a small, simple lace cap. "Your Grace," said Lady Mainwaring, "may I present my cousin, Mrs. Hartwell of Wiltshire, and her niece, Miss Hartwell. They are with me for the season." "Mrs. Hartwell. Miss Hartwell." He bowed gravely. He set down on the side table the slim, white-papered parcel. "Lady Mannering, I am extremely obliged for the kindness of receiving me at such short notice. I have come, I confess, on a small errand of restoration." "Of restoration?" "Miss Hartwell," he said, "did me the favour, 2 days ago, of taking refuge from a rainstorm in a hired chair, having borrowed an umbrella that proved, on reflection, to be mine. I should like to make her, on a perfectly equal exchange, a small gift, in apology for the abrupt manner of our introduction." He set the slim parcel before Frederica, courteously and unhurriedly. "Miss Hartwell, with my hopes that you will pardon a stranger his impudence in pursuing the matter." The parcel proved, when she opened it in front of the watching room with cold, steady fingers, to be a small, handsome black silk umbrella with a slim malacca handle. The brass tip was perfectly polished. The silk was new. It was not the same umbrella. It was, she registered with a sharp, small jolt of pleasure she did not allow on her face, exactly the same kind of umbrella. He had walked into a shop in St. James's that morning and bought her one of her own. "Your Grace," she said, in the steadiest voice she could manage, "I am extremely obliged." "Thank you, Miss Hartwell." The conversation that followed was correct. He spoke to Lady Mannering of the season. He spoke to Mrs. Hartwell of Wiltshire. He had an estate not 8 miles from Hartwell Cottage, which neither had known. He spoke to Cecily, who came in at the second cup of tea, and made her laugh once. He spoke to Frederica very little, and looked at her, when he did, with the same quiet steadiness he had used at Westbridge House. He stayed 40 minutes. He stood, bowed, took his leave, and invited all 4 Park Street ladies to the Westbridge box at the Italian Opera the following Wednesday. Lady Mannering accepted before Frederica's aunt could. When the door of Park Street had closed behind him, and the carriage had pulled away from the curb, Lady Mannering sat down very suddenly in her own chair. "Olivia," she said to Mrs. Hartwell, "do you know what has just happened in my drawing room?" "Margaret," said Mrs. Hartwell, "I have a strong suspicion that I do. He is going to walk into the box on Wednesday and seat your niece next to him." "I am not aware," said Mrs. Hartwell, "that my niece has in any way encouraged him." "Olivia, he has paid the call on us. He has brought her an umbrella. He has invited us all four to the opera. My dear, he has, perhaps, encouraged himself." Frederica sat in the corner of the drawing room, with the new black silk umbrella across her lap and her gloved hands clasped over the slim handle, and watched the late afternoon light move on the carpet at her feet. She did not, in that moment, say anything at all. Cecily Mannering, sitting opposite her, was smiling gently at the carpet. The following Wednesday, in the Westbridge box at the King's Theatre in the Haymarket, Frederica Hartwell met Lady Maria Carrington. The Duke had been correct. He had sent his carriage at 7:30, received the four ladies in the box, taken the chair at Cecily's right. Twice he had leaned across Cecily to speak directly to Frederica, once to ask whether she could see, once to draw her attention to the second tenor. But he had paid her no more attention than courtesy required. It was during the first interval that the door of the box opened behind them, and a woman's voice said, with the warm, cordial brightness of an old acquaintance, "Westbridge?" The Duke stood at once and turned. Frederica turned with him. In the doorway of the box stood the most beautiful young woman Frederica had ever seen in her life. She was tall and slender and creamily fair, her hair the color of new honey, dressed high with 3 small pearl combs. She was in pale gold satin, cut to the very edge of correctness, and trimmed with white silk at the shoulder, a string of perfect pearls at her throat, and a seed pearl bracelet at her left wrist, which her right thumb was at that moment turning a quarter turn. She was, Frederica registered, approximately 26, approximately as beautiful as a fine painting in a private collection, and approximately as cold as the cellar of the same house. "Lady Maria," said the Duke, "how do you do?" "You are extremely shockingly inattentive," said Lady Maria, smiling. "You have not been in our box once this evening. Mamma says she shall have to write to the Dowager." "I am at present," said the Duke, with the same grave courtesy he had used to Mrs. Hartwell, "the very imperfect host of my own. Lady Maria, may I present Mrs. Hartwell of Wiltshire, Miss Hartwell, Lady Mainwaring, and Miss Mainwaring. Ladies, Lady Maria Carrington." There was a particular pause. Lady Maria's pale gold gown rustled once, as she came perfectly into the box, and made her 4 perfect curtsies. "Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Hartwell, Lady Mainwaring, Miss Mainwaring. How charming." She used the word charming in the perfectly even tone of a woman who knew it would land as a slight on 3 of the 4. It landed. She did not sit. She stood with one gloved hand on the back of the Duke's chair and made conversation with the box, turning once to Cecily, once to Mrs. Hartwell, with a remark about a Mrs. Hartwell of Wiltshire her dear mamma recalled from Bath. Mrs. Hartwell, who had never been to Bath, said gravely that she did not believe it could be, and not at all to Frederica. She turned, however, to the Duke, repeatedly. The bell rang at the close of the interval. Lady Maria laid her gloved hand very briefly on the Duke's sleeve. "Westbridge, Mamma is sending the carriage round for you on Saturday at 3. We shall expect you in Berkeley Square." "Lady Maria, you are very kind. I am at present uncertain of my engagements for Saturday." "You shall come. Mamma insists. She has the new Italian songs. She's been promising you them for a fortnight." The seed pearl bracelet turned a quarter turn under her gloved thumb. "I shall not let you escape me a second time." "Lady Maria." 3 on Saturday." She inclined her head perfectly to the rest of the box, very briefly, and let herself out. The Duke did not, Frederica noticed, sit down at once when the door closed behind her. He stood for a moment at the back of his chair, with one hand on the carved rail, and looked at the floor of the box. His face was correct. There was, around the line of his jaw, a quiet, small set that had not been there during the first act. He sat. He turned the conversation, with grave, gentle courtesy, back to the singers. It was at the second interval, when the 4 ladies had gone out into the corridor to take the air, that Lady Maria appeared at Frederica's elbow. "Miss Hartwell." "Lady Maria?" "My dear, may I take your arm for a turn?" There is a very dreadful press of people on this end of the corridor. I should like to walk to the far window." There was no possible refusal. Frederica gave Lady Maria her arm. They walked 12 paces along the candlelit corridor in the soft murmur of 100 opera-goers in their finest, until they were at the alcove at the far window, where no one in particular was standing. Lady Maria stopped. She looked at Frederica with the perfectly pretty smile she had used in the box. "Miss Hartwell, I shall be perfectly plain. I think you very pleasant, very pretty, possessed of correct manners. I do not mean to wound you. May I speak as a friend?" "Lady Maria," said Frederica quietly, "you are not obliged to." "I shall. The Duke is a very kind man, and a very lonely one at present. He has lost his elder brother. He is 6 months in mourning. He is doing what young dukes do, paying calls, going to the opera, being kind in the rain to strangers. Do not read into his attentions more than the natural good manners of a gentleman." "Lady Maria, I am not aware that I have read anything into anything." "Of course not." The seed pearl bracelet turned a quarter turn under her thumb. "But the daughter of a country attorney does not catch a Duke of Westbridge. Do not mistake a duke's umbrella for a duke's intentions." Frederica stood quite still in the candlelight of the alcove. She had been spoken to, in 26 years, by enough country gentlewomen and Bath dowagers and London matrons to know the precise pitch of the private cruelty intended only to settle an account. What she had not, until this evening, known was that the women who do this in candlelit alcoves at the King's Theatre do it without a single false note. She inclined her head a quarter inch. Her gloved hand smoothed the cuff of her left glove. "Lady Maria," she said, "I am extremely obliged for your concern. I shall remember it." "My dear, I knew you would understand." Lady Maria laid her gloved hand very briefly on Frederica's arm. She inclined her head perfectly. She walked back along the candlelit corridor toward her own box. Frederica stood for a moment at the window of the alcove and looked down at the dark, shifting crowd in the foyer below. She walked back to the Westbridge box in time to enter it on her aunt's arm before the bell. She sat through the third act with her hands perfectly folded in her lap. She heard, distantly, the second tenor. She heard, more distantly, Cecily Mainwaring's quiet, small intake of breath at the end of the great aria. She did not look once at the Duke. That night, in the white bedroom at the top of Lady Mainwaring's house, with her dark hair down at her shoulders, and a single candle on the chest by the bed, Frederica sat with her hands clasped in her lap and looked at the candle for a long time. A woman like Lady Maria Carrington had not, she told herself, troubled to speak to her in an alcove for nothing. The question Lady Maria had been settling was not whether Frederica would marry the Duke. Of course she would not. But whether Frederica was to be permitted to stand in the Duke's view at all. She had her answer, perhaps, since the third stride away from the lamppost in Park Lane. She would help Cecily through her season, as she had been brought to London to do, and in October she would return to Hartwell Cottage and to her aunt's parlour. She blew out the candle. She did not, however, sleep for a long time, and when she did, she dreamed of rain. In the 10 days that followed, she saw the Duke twice in the public way of a London season. Once at Almack's, where he asked Cecily for the second set, and once at the British Museum, in the Egyptian Gallery. And not, in either house, did he ask Frederica to dance. He did, however, send to Park Street on the 7th day a slim, white-papered parcel containing an exquisite copperplate engraving of a pale yellow daffodil, framed in thin black moulding. The card read, "For Miss Hartwell, who said at Wednesday's opera that she had liked the plate of the daffodil at the Pall Mall print shop. W." Cecily said only, gently, "Freddie, he listens." Frederica hung it above the writing desk in her bedroom. On the 11th day, he called at Park Street, unannounced, at 2:30 on a Tuesday, and Mrs. Pell, the housekeeper, showed him through to the morning room without finding either Lady Mannering or Mrs. Hartwell at home. Lady Mannering was in Bond Street. Mrs. Hartwell was lying down with a headache. Cecily was at her music master's in Hanover Square. Frederica was in the back library, the one Cecily called the Cold Library because nobody had lit a fire in it for 3 weeks, cataloguing a small donation of books for the parish poor school the Mannerings supported in Hampshire. There were perhaps 80 books on a long oak table, in 3 uneven piles, and she had an ink-stained list in her left hand and a quill in her right. Mrs. Pell came to the door of the Cold Library with a small, flustered, respectful face. "Miss Hartwell. His Grace, the Duke of Westbridge." "Mrs. Pell, Lady Mannering is not at home. Mrs. Hartwell is not. I cannot—" "Miss Hartwell, His Grace did say he had brought a book back to Miss Cecily and would not wait, and I've put him in the morning room." There was no possible course but to receive him. She set down her quill. She smoothed the cuff of her left glove. She walked into the morning room. He was standing at the chimney-piece with his hat under his arm and a slim, leather-bound book in his hand. He had on the same plain dark blue coat. He looked, in the cool afternoon light of the morning room, considerably more rested than he had at Westbridge House. "Miss Hartwell." "Your Grace." "I am extremely sorry to descend on you. I had thought Lady Mannering would be at home. I brought Miss Mannering a book she asked for last Wednesday at the opera. I had not been able to find it that evening, and perhaps I should leave it with you." "Of course." He set the book on the table, a slim volume of Cooper's poems, of which Cecily had said, on Wednesday evening, that she had never read any. He did not, however, turn at once to leave. "Miss Hartwell, may I trespass on you for a moment?" "Your Grace, I am very much occupied in the back library at present. I am cataloguing a parish gift of books. I should be—" "Then," he said, with the quietest small movement of mouth she had seen on him, "may I trespass on you in the back library?" There was no possible refusal. She led him through to the Cold Library and to the long oak table with the 3 uneven piles. He looked at the table for a long moment. "Miss Hartwell, you are giving these to a parish school?" "To Sir Henry's parish school at Mannering. There is a small library for the older children. I am setting aside the ones that may be of use to a child of 9 or 10. "May I help?" She looked at him. "Your Grace." "Miss Hartwell, I have spent every afternoon for the past 3 weeks listening to attorneys explain to me, in tones of immense patience, the inheritance tax. I should be extremely grateful for an afternoon spent sorting books for a parish school." She did not, in the end, know how to refuse him. He took off his coat and laid it over a chair. In white shirt sleeves and a plain black silk waistcoat, cuffs turned back over strong, clean forearms, he was, in the grey afternoon light of an unlit library, a different man. A younger son in a hunting family, who had carried barrels and ridden young horses, and had not been allowed to be either of those things for 6 months of mourning. He sat down at the long oak table opposite her. He took up the ink-stained list. "What are your criteria, Miss Hartwell?" "Sentences of no more than 4 lines. Words of no more than 3 syllables. Illustrations are very welcome. Death and despair are not. Sermons are not." She paused. "Bunyan, in fact, is not." "Bunyan is not." "The vicar's wife at Mainwaring," said Frederica gravely, "has explained to Lady Mainwaring that the children at the parish school are already sufficiently terrified of damnation." "That is a great relief to me," he said. "I have never been able to read more than 4 pages of Bunyan without taking a small nap." She did not, in the startled instant before she could prevent it, manage to suppress her laugh. It came out as a soft, small breath through the nose. He did not look up from the book he was opening. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "may I confide in you that I have always thought Pilgrim's Progress was best read on the same afternoon as one was bled." She did laugh then. She did not quite manage to stop it. The little ringing sound of her own laugh in the Cold Library shocked her. She set down her quill and pressed her gloved fingertips briefly against her mouth. Your Grace. Forgive me. I shall not blaspheme any further against the Church Fathers in your hearing. What pile shall I begin on? They sat opposite each other at the long oak table for an hour and 20 minutes. For the first 10 minutes, she watched him with the clinical part of her mind, determined to find him insincere. By the end of the 10 minutes, she had given that part up. He was reading the books with quiet, careful interest, running his thumb down the dog-eared inside corner of a child's primer before he set it on the keep pile. She found herself talking to him as she would have talked to her father. He told her about his elder brother Edward, 3 years his senior, the brother who would have been Duke, the man who had spoken to attorneys and written the difficult letters to the tenants. Adrian. He gave her his Christian name once and apologized at once. She did not correct him. Had been the spare, intended first for the army, then for the church, because Edward would do all of it. He had been 6 and 20 when the news came in November. 6 months ago, he said. I had not, before November, sat down at a writing desk in my own life to write a letter that could not be cancelled. Your Grace. I am finding it slow, he said. I am finding it slow. The attorneys are very patient. They are men who were patient with my father and my brother. They are also, I think, clear that they had not expected to be teaching me any of it. I am clear about that too. She set down her quill and looked at him across the table. Your Grace. I do not think a man becomes a Duke of Westbridge in 6 months. No, he said. I do not think he does either. There was a small silence. She told him then as much of her own life as had any business being in such a conversation. About her father, Mr. Edmund Hartwell, attorney of a small Wiltshire market town, and her mother, the third daughter of a country clergyman. She told him about a November journey from Marlborough back to Hartwell Cottage when she was 14. Heavy rain on the chalk road, a steep bridge the wheel had caught wrong. The chaise had not come back through the bridge. She had not, she said, ever in 13 years said any of that to a stranger. You see, Your Grace, I have always thought the rain was a particular thing of mine. He did not, when she had finished, say anything for a moment. His grey eyes were level on the green-bound spine of a child's primer. Miss Hartwell, he said, if I had known you yesterday, I should not have laughed at your stolen umbrella. You did not laugh. I almost did. I almost did, for 1/2 second, before I realized what kind of face you had. What kind of face had I? You had the face, he said, of a woman who had not, in some time, been kind to in the rain by anyone at all. She set her quill down on the long oak table. She did not look at him for a moment. The cold, pale afternoon light fell on the green-bound spine of the primer between them. There was a fly somewhere at one of the high library windows. The little brass tip of her own new black silk umbrella was sticking up out of the stand by the door. Your Grace, she said, I think the housekeeper will be wondering where I have you. He stood at once. Of course, he said. Forgive me, I have gone on. You have not gone on. You have been very... Miss Hartwell. He gathered his coat. Will you forgive me the impertinence of asking you one question? If you wish. You will not, I hope, be returning to Wiltshire before October. I shall not. Then I shall hope, he said, to have, between now and October, a great many further small impertinences forgiven me. He bowed gravely. He took up his hat. He left through the back hall, before either of the 2 senior ladies of the household had returned. Frederica did not finish the cataloguing of the books that afternoon. She sat for an hour at the long oak table, with the green-bound primer under her hand. She did not, that night, write a letter to anyone. She walked, at the close of the candle, to the writing desk under her bedroom window, where the soft engraved daffodil hung in its thin black moulding, and she stood for a moment, looking at the pale yellow flower on the creamy laid paper. She did not, in fact, sleep until the hours of the morning. 3 days later, she found, on the side table in the morning room at Park Street, a small, new, slim volume of Cooper's letters, bound in cream calf, with the Westbridge bookplate carefully removed. There was no card. There was a folded slip of paper inside the cover, on which had been written, in the same clean, upright hand, "For your back library. W." She sent him, in return, by Mrs. Pell the housekeeper on the following morning, a small, slim volume of her father's old copy of Cooper's poems, with one corner of the page at "The Task" turned gently down, and a folded note that said, "My father read this aloud to my mother in the winter of 1810. I do not know that he ever made it through the third book without crying. F.H." She walked, that afternoon, down to the front railing of Park Street, and stood in the open doorway looking out at the bright, pale sunshine on the dust of the road and the gilt of the windows opposite, and was perfectly still for a long moment. She knew then the precise shape of the difficulty in which she now stood. She knew that whatever Lady Maria Carrington had told her in the candlelit alcove of the King's Theatre had not, in any small measure, been wrong. And she knew also that whatever the Duke of Westbridge had told her in the cold afternoon light of the back library was not, in any measure, false. The two things, she thought with the cool back of her mind, were both perfectly true. And they were both equally inconvenient. It was on the morning of the third Friday in May that the paragraph appeared in the Morning Post. Mrs. Hartwell read the paper at the breakfast table in Park Street, as she had for 35 years. She read aloud the social paragraphs of the second page, the engagement of a Miss Lascelles in Lincolnshire, the marriage of an Honourable Mr. Petersfield at St. George's, Hanover Square. She read then, in the clean voice of a woman who has been reading 3-line paragraphs aloud since 1791. His Grace the Duke of W. and Lady Maria C. have been observed much in each other's company at the late assemblies. The Earl of L. is said to be very far advanced in his preparations at the family seat of Linfield Park for a great alliance which will be the surprise of no one before the close of the season. There was a particular silence at the breakfast table. Mrs. Hartwell set down the paper without comment. She picked up her teacup. She drank. Cecily, on the other side of the table, looked up from her bread and butter. "Mamma." "Cecily." "That is Cecily," said Lady Mainwaring evenly. "Eat your toast." Frederica laid her bread and butter very carefully on the side of her plate. She'd been about to take a sip of her tea. She set the cup down on its saucer at the precise small clink it had been making for 30 mornings in a row, and she rose. "Aunt, Lady Mainwaring, I beg you will excuse me. I have 1 or 2 notes I must write before noon. I shall write them in the garden, if I may. It is a great pity to spend such a morning indoors." "Of course, child," said Mrs. Hartwell, who in 26 years had not once shown her niece a face she had no business showing. Frederica did not look at Cecily. She did not look at Lady Mainwaring. She walked perfectly composedly out of the breakfast room and through the back passage and out of the side door into the narrow walled garden behind Park Street. It was a clear, bright morning. The garden was 30 yards long and 10 wide, with brick walls and a small iron gate at the back, a single fine old pear tree against the south wall, and against that wall, a long, disordered drift of white narcissus that had been the joy of Sir Henry Mannering's gardener for 15 years. Frederica took up the garden scissors from the box by the door and walked steadily down the gravel path to the white narcissus. She was cutting them, with her gloved hands and her steady, steady eyes, when she heard the iron gate at the back of the garden open behind her. She turned. The Duke of Westbridge had walked through the mews and let himself in at the back gate. He had no carriage. He had no hat. He had on the same plain dark blue coat. He had, under his arm, that morning's Morning Post. He shut the iron gate behind him quietly. He did not come down the gravel path at once. He stood for a moment at the gate, looking down the length of the garden, with the bright morning sun on his uncovered hair, and he watched her for the steadying breath she did not know was visible. "Miss Hartwell," Your Grace? He came down the gravel path. He stopped 3 paces from her at the south wall. You have, he said, read this morning's Morning Post. I have. He set the folded paper carefully on the wrought iron garden seat at the wall. He looked at her, level and steady, in the bright morning light. Miss Hartwell, I have not in any conversation, in any house in London, said one syllable to confirm the paragraph you read this morning. I did not write it. I did not authorize it. I had not, until I read it in my own breakfast room, the smallest notion that it would be in this morning's paper. I came directly to this garden because I was not prepared to send an apology by Lady Mainwaring's footman. Your Grace, I do not know, he said, what you have heard, or what you have thought since Wednesday last. I do not, in fact, ask. I ask only that you allow me to tell you, here, in this garden, in your own ear, that you should not, for one further hour, believe that paragraph. She stood at the south wall with the white narcissus in her gloved hand, and her gloved thumb gently smoothing the cuff of her left glove. She did not, for a moment, speak. Your Grace, she said quietly, I have not asked you. No, he said, you have not. I am, in fact, aware. I am asking you to know. There was a particular silence. She did not look at him. She looked at the bright, clean morning sun on the brick of the south wall behind him. Your Grace, she said, what does the Earl of Linfield want, then? He wants his daughter to be a duchess. He has wanted it, I believe, for 3 years. I have been, by his calculation, 3 years overdue. And what does Lady Maria want? He considered this for a long moment. I am not entirely certain, he said. I am perhaps the wrong man to ask, but, Miss Hartwell, what she does not, I think, want, is what she is at present obliged by her father's calculation to want. I should not say more. And what, she said, in a voice that was a little quieter than the last, does your Grace want? He looked at her then. The bright morning sun was on the side of his face. Miss Hartwell, I have been 6 months a duke, and have not yet had the impertinence to want anything at all. I came into this garden this morning because I read a paragraph in a public paper that placed me, by implication, where I should not, on any honourable account, be placed. I came to tell you that. I did not come, and I shall not come, this morning, to tell you anything further. Your Grace. I shall, however, he said quietly, ask you for one thing. What thing? That you should let me know, by whatever means is most respectable to you, when, if ever, the day comes that I may, with your permission, ask anything further. Until then I shall pay the morning calls. I shall be at the assemblies. I shall be in the box on Wednesday. I shall not, by any paragraph or private alcove, be where I am not, by your understanding. She did not, for a moment, speak. She lifted the white narcissus in her hand. She set it, with the others, in the willow basket at her feet. Your Grace, she said, I am going to ask you, in return, one perfectly impertinent question. You may. Have you been in this garden, in your life, before this morning, on any other occasion? He considered. No, he said. Then how did you find your way through the mews? He smiled. It was the first proper smile she had ever seen on him. I asked, he said gravely, your aunt's coachman, who is at present cleaning my carriage at the mews end. Your Grace, Miss Hartwell. He was extremely obliging. She set down the garden scissors on the wrought iron seat. She stood for a moment in the bright, clean morning light. Your Grace, she said, I shall let you know, by whatever is the most respectable means I can devise, when I have known the answer to your question. I do not know it this morning. Miss Hartwell, that is more than I came hoping for. It is not, however, very much. It is enough. He stood for a moment in the bright morning light. He bowed gravely. He turned. He walked back up the gravel path, opened the iron gate at the back of the garden, and went out into the mews. Frederica stood at the south wall for a long moment, with the white narcissus in the willow basket at her feet, and she looked at the folded square of the Morning Post on the wrought iron seat where he had laid it. She took it up. She walked back up the gravel path. She folded the paper twice more, with steady hands, and she dropped it into the kitchen fire on her way past the kitchen door. The umbrella came back into the story a fortnight later, on a Thursday afternoon outside Hatchard's bookshop in Piccadilly. Lady Manwaring and Mrs. Hartwell had gone ahead by carriage to a private exhibition at the Royal Academy. Cecily and Frederica had walked down from Park Street to meet them at 5, and had spent half an hour in Hatchard's choosing a new novel of Miss Edgeworth's, discovering, at the back counter very perfectly accidentally, the Duke of Westbridge looking through a pamphlet on parish poor laws. There had been the grave greetings, the civil exchange about the weather, and the Duke's correct offer to walk the ladies as far as Bond Street. They had been 3 paces past the door of Hatchard's when the sky, which had been a high, clean spring blue, turned, in the impudent London manner, to a sudden iron grey, and the first heavy drops were striking the curb. The Duke of Westbridge had, this time, an umbrella. He had also, by perfect accident, or perfect arrangement, the same umbrella. It was the same slim black silk umbrella with the malacca handle and the brass tip. He had carried it in the inner pocket of his coat, in the way a country gentleman carries his pencil. He had it in his hand by the time the 3rd drop fell. He opened it. He held it over the 3 of them, and there was, instantly, the obvious necessity that someone would have to be the one to walk on his arm under it. Cecily Mainwaring, who was 19 and had not laughed properly in 3 weeks, said, with the perfectly serious face she had been keeping in reserve since the milliner's parlour, "Your Grace, I am so sorry. I have a perfectly excellent pelisse, and I do not in the smallest mind a few drops. And Freddie's bonnet is the practical one. If you would be very good, take her arm under the umbrella. I shall walk a pace behind. I shall not get wet at all." Frederica did not, in that moment, look at Cecily. If she had looked at Cecily, she would not, she thought afterwards, have managed to keep her face. The Duke offered Frederica his arm. She took it. She took it through the gloved cuff. They walked the corner of Old Bond Street under a single black silk umbrella, with the rain running down the silk and the brass tip catching the iron light. He did not, for the first 50 yards, say anything at all. At the 51st yard, he said, quietly, "Miss Hartwell, I have, I believe, done one small thing this afternoon that I shall confess to." "Your Grace." "I knew, before I left Westbridge House, that there was a storm coming up the Thames. I had the umbrella. I did not, I assure you on my honour, know that you would be at Hatchard's at 4. "Your Grace, I am quite capable of believing that." "I hoped," he said, "that you would." The umbrella over them was silent in the rain. Their gloves were touching at the inside of his sleeve. Cecily Mainwaring was walking a quiet, perfectly happy 3 paces behind, with her own bonnet ribbons damp, and her own face perfectly composed. "Your Grace," said Frederica, at the corner of Bruton Street, "I am, this afternoon, beginning to suspect that you have been carrying that umbrella in your pocket for 2 weeks. "Miss Hartwell, I shall not, on a clear point of honour, deny that. I have, in fact, been carrying it in my pocket for 2 weeks." "That is a great many afternoons of clear sky." "Miss Hartwell," he said, "rain in London is a thing one always prepares for, and one is never always wrong." She did laugh then. The little soft laugh did not, this time, shock her at all. She did not, this time, press her gloved fingertips against her mouth. She walked the rest of Bond Street on the inside of the Duke of Westbridge's sleeve, in the rain, under his umbrella, and she did not, by the time they had reached the Royal Academy, withdraw her hand. Lady Manwaring had been an observant woman for 44 years, and by the close of that wet Thursday, she had observed quite enough. She arranged, at the second post, a private dinner at Park Street for the following Wednesday, 6 covers, family style, inviting the Duke, Sir Henry, Mrs. Hartwell, Cecily, and Mr. Maitland, the suitable young Foot Guards officer who had been Cecily's second partner at Almack's. She did not invite Miss Hartwell. The table was set for 6, and the sex ratio was perfectly balanced. Dear Frederica would not, she gravely explained to Mrs. Hartwell over the second pot of tea, mind sitting out a single small dinner, so that the table should be balanced for a particular young man, whom Cecily must be brought, this season, to consider. Mrs. Hartwell, who was a country attorney's widow, set her cup down on its saucer with the particular small clink she made when she did not approve of what she had just heard, and said only that her niece would do as her hostess wished. Frederica heard about the dinner from Cecily. Cecily came up to Frederica's small white bedroom at the top of the house on the Sunday afternoon, and sat on the edge of the bed with her hands clasped in her lap, and a face Frederica had not seen on her in 3 months. Freddie. Cecily. Mamma is putting a private dinner together for Wednesday. He shall come. Mr. Maitland shall come. Papa is coming up from Hampshire for it. Mamma has told Mr. Maitland's mother that he is to sit, I believe, at my left, and the Duke at my right. And we shall— she has not said it. We shall sing for them after dinner. Cecily, you are not invited. Frederica did not, for a moment, say anything. She sat on the ladder-backed chair at her writing desk, with the engraved daffodil over her shoulder on the wall, and she folded her gloved hands in her lap. Cecily, she said, I am, you know, perfectly content to sit out a dinner. It is perfectly appropriate that I should. I am here as your companion, not as your sister. Freddie, stop it. Stop what? Stop being 27 and sensible. I am 18 and a half, and I am being put in front of a duke. I do not want a duke. I want a perfectly nice Mr. Maitland with 3 sisters and an aunt in Cheltenham. I want to walk in Hampshire with him in October. I do not want to sing Voi che sapete for a man who has, in 3 weeks, looked at me exactly twice. Cecily. Freddie, tell me what to do. Frederica looked at her young friend in the soft afternoon light. She had watched Cecily being shaped, these 3 months, to a life Cecily herself had understood since the age of 13 was not the life she wanted. She had also been, in the past fortnight, spoken to in a candlelit alcove. She had walked under a duke's umbrella through Bond Street in the rain. She had been, in 3 weeks, properly looked at for the first time in 26 years. Her father had once told her, in the winter of 1810, that the only useful question in any small private cruelty was what the cruelty was meant to defend. Lady Mainwaring's dinner was meant to defend Cecily's place at a dining table she did not want. Lady Maria's alcove had been meant to defend her own place at a writing desk she had no intention of leaving. Cecily, said Frederica quietly, I shall not tell you what to do. I shall tell you what I should do if I were 18 and a half, and were being sat next to a man whom I did not, on any private examination of my own heart, wish to marry. What? I should choose, said Frederica, the song. Your mother has chosen Voi che sapete because she has heard you sing it for your aunts in Wiltshire. The Duke has heard the same aria, very probably, at Almack's, sung by a young woman in pale lemon satin with a tutor from Milan. He will hear it again on Wednesday, and he will be courteous, and he will think you have been very well taught. Yes. But, Cecily, you do not sing the Italian. You sing the English. You sing The Last Rose of Summer. I have heard you sing it in the back garden in March in your bedroom slippers, and for your old nurse. You sing it as a young woman in her own back garden, not the way the aunts and dukes of London expect a girl to sing it. Sing that on Wednesday. Mamma will be furious. Your mother, said Frederica, will be a great deal less furious than she will be if you go through Wednesday and meet the man at the end of it with a small, steady refusal in your mouth that you have not in advance given her the smallest warning of. Cecily looked at her. "Freddie, why are you doing this?" "Because," said Frederica, "if a man is to choose you, Cecily, he should be permitted, for once, to choose the part of you that is yours, not the part of you that is your mother's. And if he chooses your mother's part of you, then you shall know that, too, and you shall know it before you stand in front of a clergyman." Cecily Mainwaring sat for a long moment on the edge of the white counterpaned bed. "Mr. Maitland," she said softly, "has heard me sing The Last Rose of Summer once. He was sitting in the corner of our drawing room in March. He had been brought to tea by his mother. He told me afterwards, quietly, that his sister had used to sing it when he was a boy." "Then sing it," said Frederica. "Sing it for both of them on Wednesday." Cecily stood. She crossed the white bedroom. She pressed Frederica's gloved hand once, briefly, very hard. She did not say anything more. She left Frederica sitting on the ladder-back chair under the engraved daffodil. The small private dinner at Park Street on the Wednesday evening was an extremely well-arranged affair. Sir Henry Mannering sat at the head, Lady Mannering at the foot. Cecily was at her father's right, with the Duke at her own right. Mr. Maitland was at her father's left, with Mrs. Hartwell beside him. 6 covers, perfectly balanced. 3 pairs of polished candlesticks down the centre. A low arrangement of late white narcissus and pale yellow primroses in the middle. There was Miss Hartwell, also, at the writing desk in the back library, with the long oak table cleared and a single candle by her hand, cataloguing the last of the parish poor school books for Sir Henry's gardener to take down to Hampshire on the Friday morning. She did not, in fact, mind sitting out the dinner. She had been brought up by an aunt who had taught her that a person who minds sitting out a dinner is a person who has not yet learned to do without the dinner. She had her catalogue list. She had her cup of tea. She had, on the long oak table, a small bowl of white narcissus that Mrs. Pell had set there for her at 7:30 without a word. She heard the soft sounds of the dinner along the back passage. At the fish course, she heard Sir Henry's deep, contented laugh, the laugh of a country gentleman 3 months in Hampshire and glad to be back at his own table. At the meat course, she heard Lady Mannering's hostess voice steering the conversation. The 2 young men contributed in the steady murmur of well-bred men at table, but no single sentence carried. She finished her catalogue list at 9:15. She closed the ledger. She set the quill in the inkstand. She sat for a moment in the candlelight, with her gloved hands folded in her lap, and she listened to the dinner sounds further down the house. Then she rose, and she did the one thing she had told herself she would not on any account do. She walked, in her grey silk evening gown, down the back passage as far as the panelled door that opened on the upper landing of the dining-room stair. She did not open the door. She stood at the door in the warm candlelight and listened. She heard Lady Mannering's voice, and perfectly the right pitch of a hostess pleased with her own arrangement, say, "Cecily, my dear, will you sing for us before we go in?" She heard the soft scrape of Cecily's chair. She heard the particular silence of a drawing-room that has just been told a young woman shall sing. She heard the clear sound of Cecily walking to the open square pianoforte by the front window. She heard the soft chord of the introduction. She did not, then, hear the Italian. She heard, clear and very simple and very steady, the opening line of The Last Rose of Summer, in Cecily Mannering's own perfectly trained but un-Italianate young voice. "'Tis the last rose of summer, left blooming alone. All her lovely companions are faded and gone." Frederica stood quite still in the warm candlelight of the back passage, with one gloved hand against the panelled door. She listened. She listened to all 8 stanzas of the song, in the quiet, steady voice of a young woman in her own back garden in March. She listened, in the particular silence of the drawing-room beyond, to the last fading chord. She listened to the particular silence after the chord. She heard then the Duke of Westbridge's voice, quieter than she had ever heard it before, say gently, "Miss Mannering, that is a song my mother used to sing." She heard the soft scrape of Cecily standing from the pianoforte stool. She heard, at the very end of the particular silence, Mr. Maitland's voice. Clear, young, not at all polished, perfectly direct. "Miss Mannering, I have not heard that sung properly in 2 years." She did not hear, after that, anything she could carry away. There was a small movement of chairs. There was the particular small murmur of a drawing-room reassembling. There was Lady Mannering's voice, much higher than it had been before, requesting Cecily to sing for them, now, the Italian. Frederica walked away from the panelled door before Cecily could sing the Italian. She walked back into the back library. She sat down at the writing desk. She blew out the single candle. She sat in the dark for some time before she allowed herself to think. She had, she thought after a while, said one thing this season that had cost her her bed and her board. She did not, in any private measure of her own heart, regret it. It was a little before 10:30 when she heard the step in the passage behind her. The candle had been out for half an hour. The small back library was a soft, cold, pale dark, with the moonlight on the long oak table and the white narcissus dim in the bowl. Frederica had been sitting, motionless, with her gloved hands folded. She heard the step. She heard the clear knock at the open door of the library. She heard the Duke of Westbridge's voice say quietly, "Miss Hartwell, are you here?" She did not for a moment speak. "Your Grace." He came into the dark library. He carried a single small bedroom candle in a brass holder. He set it carefully on the long oak table. "Miss Hartwell, I came round to the back. Mrs. Pell let me in. I'm extremely sorry to disturb you. I shall not stay. I wished only to ask, are you well?" She did not stand. She did not turn her face to him. "Your Grace, I am perfectly well." "Miss Hartwell, I had not, until I came in to dinner this evening, the smallest understanding that you would not be at the table." "There was a question of balance, Your Grace." "There was a question," he said quietly, "of which I should have demanded a perfectly straight answer at the door, before I sat down." She did, at that, turn her face to him. "Your Grace, Miss Hartwell, I have, in the past 6 weeks, sat at perhaps 18 dining tables in London, at which I have been the gentleman of highest precedence. I've sat with my hands in my lap and my mouth shut, and eaten what was set before me. I shall not, henceforth, sit at a table in which the question of balance has been resolved by the absence of the one person at whose face I had hoped to look." She did not, for a moment, say anything. "Your Grace." "Miss Hartwell, I shall make Lady Mannering no scene. I shall thank her at the door in perfectly civil terms. I shall not return to Park Street for any further small private dinner this season, however the table is balanced or unbalanced. I have come, however, by the back, to say to you the one thing I should have said to you in the library 3 weeks ago, when I sorted your parish books with you. Your Grace, Miss Hartwell, I had no business saying it then. I have, in fact, no business saying it tonight. I shall, however, by your earlier permission in the garden, say it now, because I shall not be able to say it tomorrow, or the morning after, in any morning room or any opera box, or any clean dry afternoon in Bond Street." He sat down opposite her at the long oak table. He looked at her in the soft, cold light of the single candle. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "I should like, with your permission, to ask your aunt for the privilege of paying you a more particular kind of address than is, at present, between us." She did not, in the soft, cold candlelight, say anything for a long moment. "Your Grace," she said, I am—" "Miss Hartwell, I am asking. I am not asking for an answer this evening. I am asking, only, for the right to ask, this season, a question." She looked at him in the steady candlelight. She had not, in the ringing back of her mind, allowed herself to expect to hear it. She had, through 3 Wednesdays and a Saturday, and 1 wet afternoon under the umbrella in Bond Street, told herself, very calmly, that whatever passed between them was perfectly contained inside his good-humored manners and her own civil reserve. She had, she realized in the cold candlelight, been lying to herself for 3 Wednesdays. She set her gloved hand on the long oak table. "Your Grace," she said quietly, "I shall give you the right to ask. I shall not give you, this evening, the answer." "Miss Hartwell, that is more than I came hoping for." "It is not, however, very much." "It is enough." He took up the single brass candle. He did not reach across the long oak table for her hand. He bowed gravely to her in the soft candlelight. He turned. He walked back along the back passage to the front door of Park Street. She heard his step at the door. She heard Mrs. Pell open the door. She heard the soft, particular sound of the door closing behind him. She sat in the dark for a long time. She thought of her father's face on the box of the chaise at Marlborough in 1810, her aunt's hand on her shoulder at the door the morning after, the new black silk umbrella in Lady Mainwaring's drawing-room, and one perfectly straight phrase, "I shall be your first subscriber, you understand," that had not yet been said, but that she could already hear. She thought, too, of Lady Maria Carrington's small private alcove. She was, then, quite certain. She was certain in the clean way of a woman who has finally heard a clock chime that she has been listening for since November of 1810. She did not say any of it aloud. She rose. She lit the candle on the long oak table. She walked up the back stairs to her own bedroom. She slept, for the first time in a fortnight, properly through the night. On the Sunday afternoon following the private dinner the Duke of Westbridge took her, with her aunt's correct permission and Cecily Mannering's correct chaperonage, to walk in Kensington Gardens. The day was the bright, clean blue and green of late May. The young chestnut leaves were the pale green of 3 weeks before midsummer. The grass was still soft from dew. There were children with kites at the south end, and a small string quartet practicing in the Italian garden by the fountain. Not many people were walking, for it was the season's last Sunday before Lord Wexford's great summer ball. Cecily Mannering had been given by her mother a particular instruction about distance, and she carried it out with the precise punctilio of a young woman who had been chaperoning her older cousin for 19 days with more enthusiasm than her mother had anticipated. She walked 11 paces behind, gloved hands folded at the front of her primrose pelisse, and did not, in any of the 80 minutes they walked, once look up at them. Frederica walked on the inside of the Duke's arm. They did not, for the first 10 minutes, speak. They walked the long chestnut avenue together at the perfect quiet pace of 2 people who had agreed in advance that the walk itself was the conversation. At the bench by the south end of the avenue, the Duke paused and asked gently whether she would care to sit. They sat. Cecily Mannering sat, perfectly correctly, on a small further bench 8 yards away, took out a small book of Miss Edgeworth's, and pretended to read. The Duke of Westbridge sat with his hands clasped between his knees and his level grey eyes on the gravel at his feet for a small moment, and then he turned his face to her. "Miss Hartwell." "Your Grace?" "I have not, in any small, precise way, asked you what kind of life you should choose, if you were free to choose it." She looked at him in the bright, clean sun. "Your Grace, I have not been asked that by anyone in 27 years. "Then I am asking it." She thought, in the bright, clean sun, for a long moment. "I should like," she said at last, "to open a circulating library in Bath." He did not, for a moment, say anything. He only looked at her with the steady attention with which he had read the inside corner of a child's primer in a back library 3 weeks before. A circulating library. In one of the streets behind the pump room. 3 rooms, the front for the lending desk, the middle for the children's books, the back for the older novels and the periodicals. Since I was 20, I have been saving the portion of my aunt's house money she allowed me to keep. I have £93 in the funds. I require 140 to begin. By Michaelmas of next year, I shall have it. By Michaelmas of next year. By Michaelmas of next year. Miss Hartwell, he said quietly. I had not, until this afternoon, known precisely how badly I had wanted to know what you should choose. She did not look at him then. She looked at the bright fountain in the Italian garden. Your Grace, she said, if I am being asked this afternoon what I should choose if I were free, I should say that. I should say a circulating library in Bath. I should say 1 or 2 small subscribers and a single, quiet, upstairs room of my own, and a parrot in a cage at the desk. A parrot? My father had a parrot at the offices in Wiltshire. He was, in his way, a perfectly competent legal clerk. Miss Hartwell. Your Grace. Will you promise me, whatever else passes between us this season, that you shall, in fact, open it? She looked at him. I shall, she said. Then promise. I promise. He nodded gravely. He looked back at the bright fountain. Miss Hartwell. Your Grace. I shall be your first subscriber, you understand. She laughed. It was the soft laugh of 2 days before in the rain, but it had, this time, a particular warmth in it. You shall have, she said, neither the Cowper nor the umbrella. He smiled. The smile reached, this time, all the way to the fine lines at the corner of his level grey eyes. I shall accept, he said, what terms are offered me. They sat in the bright, clean sun, with the fountain and the children with kites at the other end of the avenue, and a string quartet rehearsing an old Italian aria in the Italian garden. Your Grace, said Frederica gently, if we walked in the lime avenue at Westbridge in October, I had thought I should like that very much. He did not look at her at once. You shall, he said. In October. The limes there turn a very particular yellow. There is a small stone bench at the south end. There is a thrush in the corner copse who has been there, my father told me, since before the year 9. Your Grace, and I shall, by then, have learned to share an umbrella. Have you not learned? Miss Hartwell, he said, I have been carrying yours in my pocket for 2 weeks. I have not yet, in the strictest small sense of the verb, shared it. She laughed again. She did not, this time, press her gloved fingertips to her mouth at all. They sat in the bright, clean sun together for a small further while. Cecily Mainwaring turned a page of Miss Edgeworth's, very carefully, 8 yards away. The small, bright fountain played in the Italian garden. Frederica Hartwell sat on the inside of the Duke's sleeve, at the south end of the Chestnut Avenue, in the bright, clean, blue and green afternoon of late May, and allowed herself, for the first afternoon in 27 years, to inhabit, for 40 minutes, the bright one life she had been told all her life she must not look at. The letter arrived at Park Street on the Tuesday afternoon. It was carried, as such letters are, by Lady Maria Carrington in person. She came in her own carriage with her own footman at 3:30, and she sent up a card asking Mrs. Hartwell of Wiltshire to do her the honour of seeing her on a private family matter. Mrs. Hartwell, who had, that morning, received the Duke of Westbridge in her own dressing-room, and had given him, after 1 quiet quarter of an hour, the formal permission he had come for, was a country attorney's widow, and she was quite capable of seeing a Lady Maria Carrington in her own front parlour without alarm. She received her in the front drawing-room. She received her with Frederica at her side. Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Hartwell, Lady Maria, I shall not, I hope, trespass on your kindness for very long. I have come, in fact, on a particular errand on which I would be extremely obliged to be both seen and answered. Mrs. Hartwell inclined her head perfectly. Lady Maria sat. Frederica did not. Lady Maria opened the reticule on her wrist. She took out, with the perfect, unhurried precision of a woman who had practiced the gesture in her dressing-room before she came, a folded letter on the cream Westbridge House paper that Frederica knew. The seal had been broken. "I have, this morning," said Lady Maria evenly, "received from my father, the Earl of Linfield, a small letter of family business, which I am at liberty to read to you. It is a letter written by the late Duke of Westbridge, Edward Forster, my father's old friend, to his younger brother, Adrian, 2 weeks before he took ship for Lisbon. It was found among the late Duke's papers this last March." She unfolded the letter. She held it steady. She read aloud. "My dear Adrian, I write this on the morning of my departure for Lisbon. The crossing is never wholly certain at this season, and if anything should befall me, I should wish my house in order. Of the matter of Lady Maria Carrington, I have not spoken to anyone but you. She has been, these 3 years past, the fixed object of my private heart. Her father knows my mind. She knows it. I have not, however, on a question of her age and her father's wishes, asked her for any promise yet. If I do not come back, dear brother, I should be very glad to know that you would look kindly upon her. Your loving brother, Edward." The room was silent. Lady Maria laid the letter on the table between them. "Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Hartwell, I should not, on any honest account, have come into this drawing-room this afternoon if my father had not, this morning, insisted. I have, on every public occasion this season, conducted myself with what restraint I could. I shall not, after this afternoon, say it again." "Lady Maria—" "My dear Miss Hartwell, I do not come to wound you. I come to make plain that there is in the matter of his grace a small prior charge upon his honour that has not, perhaps, been understood in full. The Duke is the kindest of men. He is also a brother. He has not, and shall not, while his brother's letter remains his, be entirely his own man. I came to say only that." She rose. She inclined her head with the most perfect, gentle gravity. She left the letter on the table. "Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Hartwell, I am extremely obliged for your kindness in receiving me. I shall not trespass further." She went out. There was the soft, particular sound of her carriage in the street. Mrs. Hartwell sat for a moment in her chair. She did not, for some moments, look at her niece. When she did, she said only, quietly and evenly, "Frederica." "Aunt?" "You have heard the letter." "I have." "You shall, of course, do as you wish." Frederica did not, for a moment, say anything. She walked to the table. She lifted the letter. She read, slowly and in silence, the 11 lines for herself. The letter was, unmistakably, in the hand of a man brought up to that hand. The Westbridge bookplate watermark was unmistakable. The October date was unmistakable. The phrasing, "the small fixed object of my private heart," was the phrasing of a man who had been brought up by the same tutor as his younger brother. She set the letter down on the table. "Aunt," she said quietly, I am going to write a small letter. To His Grace. To His Grace. Frederica. Aunt, I shall not be long. I shall not say to him what I have heard. I shall write only that I have, on reflection, reconsidered. Frederica, child, sit down for one moment. Aunt, if I sit down for one moment, I shall not write the letter. I should be extremely obliged if you should leave me in the back library for half an hour. Mrs. Hartwell, who in 26 years had never refused her niece anything that her niece had asked in that precise voice, rose, set her hand on Frederica's shoulder once, briefly, and went out. Frederica walked into the back library. She sat down at the writing desk, the one she had not, in the cold candlelight of the private dinner, allowed herself to sit at. She took up a clean sheet of cream paper. She dipped the quill. She wrote, in the steady hand she had used for 13 years for letters of cool civility to her aunt's old correspondence. Your Grace, I write very briefly. I have reconsidered the kindness I offered you in Kensington Gardens, and I find that I am not, after all, in any position to allow you to ask any further question of me this season. I shall not trouble you with my reasons. I am extremely obliged for every kindness you have shown me, and I shall consider myself, for the remainder of my life, your devoted and respectful well-wisher, F. Hartwell. She read the letter through once. She did not, in the cool, clear back of her mind, allow herself to read it through twice. She folded it. She sealed it. She walked into the hall. She rang the bell. Mrs. Pell came. Mrs. Pell, will you be so good as to send this letter to Westbridge House by the next footman? By hand, please, into the house, not to the post. Yes, Miss Hartwell. Mrs. Pell, at once. Yes, miss. Frederica walked back into the back library. She did not sit at the writing desk. She did not sit anywhere. She stood with her back to the long oak table, with her gloved hands clasped, and she did not allow herself to weep. She thought, in the cool back of her mind, that she had been right all along. The Duke had courted her because he was 6 months a duke, and had not yet been allowed to want anything for himself. By Michaelmas, by his brother's hand from a closed sea, he would be obliged to do the right thing by Lady Maria Carrington. And a man so obliged would take what small bright warmth he could from a Kensington Gardens bench beside a country attorney's daughter. She did not, however, weep. She stood with her gloved hands clasped and her face steady at the long oak table, and she looked at the late afternoon sun on the green-bound spine of a child's primer on the side table. She did not, when at last she walked up to her own bedroom, sleep that night either. What Lady Maria did not know was that the Duke had been ready for the letter since March. Edward's letter had been put into Adrian's hand by Garrard on the 3rd. On the 4th, Adrian had written by his own hand to the Earl of Linfield that his brother's letter had been the letter of a man preparing for a crossing, that no engagement had ever existed between Edward and Lady Maria, and that he should be sorry if any misconstruction of it ever reached his own house in a form that might wound a young woman who had done him no wrong. The Earl had written back on the 5th that he considered the matter, on both sides, perfectly closed. Both letters had lain, since then, in the Westbridge attorney's strong-box. Lady Maria knew none of this. She knew only of her father's October letter, and his reluctant Monday permission to do what she liked with a copy. She had concluded, in the King's Theatre alcove 4 weeks before, that the Duke would, in due season, see her interest in the dukedom, and had not allowed for the matter being settled, in May, in a Park Street back library. She rode home with the private knowledge that the country attorney's daughter would do, by the second post, exactly what she had been determined she should do. She had not, however, accounted for the second post. The Duke of Westbridge had been at Westbridge House for the afternoon, with Garrard, the family attorney, on a small tenant matter that had needed his signature. He had returned to Grosvenor Square at 6. Mrs. Pell's footman had delivered the letter at 6:20. He had read it twice. He had stood in the front hall of Westbridge House with the letter in his hand, while Burrows, the silver-haired butler, looked, with the perfectly expressionless face he had worn for 35 years, at the floor. Burrows. Your Grace. My horse, please. The black. Your Grace. The dinner. Lord Wexford's ball at Burrows. My horse. And send word to Lord Wexford that I shall be at the ball at 9. Your Grace. Burrows, will you also have the carriage of Garrard, the attorney, brought round at once, and ask him to attend me here at 7:30. Your Grace. He went up the soft carpeted stair without taking off his coat. Garrard arrived at 7:30. The Duke received him in the morning room. Garrard left at 8:15, with the key to the strong-box and 2 specific instructions. By 9:15, the fair copies of the Duke's letter to the Earl of Linfield of the 4th of March and the Earl's reply of the 5th were folded inside the breast pocket of the Duke's evening coat. He arrived at Lord Wexford's ball in Berkeley Square at 9:12. Lady Mannering, Mrs. Hartwell, Sir Henry Mannering, Cecily Mannering, and Frederica Hartwell had arrived at the same ball at 9. Frederica had not wished to come. Frederica had been, by her aunt, gently and perfectly inflexibly required. She wore the cream silk gown that she had been keeping for her aunt's first formal evening of the autumn assembly at home. She wore her mother's cameo brooch. Her dark hair was coiled at the nape, under a single small twist of white narcissus that Cecily had pressed into her hand at the door of Park Street without a word. She had been at the ball 40 minutes when the Duke of Westbridge walked in. The room was perhaps 80 couples deep. The chandeliers were full of fresh wax candles. The orchestra was playing the first set of country dances under the long mirror at the far end. The Earl of Linfield was at the door of the first card room. Lady Maria Carrington, in pale gold satin, with 3 small pearl combs in her honey-coloured hair, was placed beside her father. The Duke of Westbridge crossed the ballroom in 8 perfectly even paces, and stopped at the door of the first card room before the Earl. "Lord Linfield, Lady Maria, I am extremely obliged for the kindness of an immediate quarter of an hour. In the antechamber at your right, if you would be so good." The Earl of Linfield, who was a man of steady judgment when his daughter's small private machinery was not at work, bowed gravely and entered the antechamber. Lady Maria, who was a young woman of perfectly disciplined manners, followed her father. The Duke of Westbridge closed the door of the antechamber behind them. He did not raise his voice. He spoke for perhaps 3 minutes, in the same level, quiet, courteous voice with which he had once, in a back library, asked a country attorney's daughter what kind of life she should choose. He produced, from the breast pocket of his evening coat, 2 folded letters and set them on the green baize card table. "Lord Linfield, Lady Maria, my brother's letter, of which a copy was this afternoon read aloud in Park Street, was answered on the 3rd of March. These 2 letters are my reply of the 4th and your acknowledgement of the 5th. I have, since then, considered the matter perfectly closed. I shall be obliged, Lady Maria, if you would write, by your own hand, by the second post, to Mrs. Hartwell, and inform her that any further construction placed upon Edward's letter is without ground." The Earl of Linfield, who had not, until that moment, known that his daughter had had a copy of Edward's letter at all, closed his eyes for the breath of a man learning a piece of his own family that he had not, in 26 years, expected to learn. Lady Maria did not, for a long moment, say anything. She turned, with the perfectly small, precise quarter turn of the seed pearl bracelet at her wrist she had been making all season, away from the table. "Westbridge," she said, in a perfectly quiet voice. "You shall have the letter, by my own hand, by midnight." "Lady Maria, I shall not also be in any further small alcove this season. That, Lady Maria, would be a very great kindness." He inclined his head perfectly to the Earl. He inclined his head perfectly to Lady Maria. He opened the door of the antechamber. He took up, on the green baize card table, the 2 folded letters. He kept them in his hand. He walked back into the ballroom. Cecily Mainwaring saw him first, from the 3rd figure of the country dance, and her small, particular intake of breath was audible to her partner. Lady Mainwaring saw him second. Mrs. Hartwell saw him third. Frederica, who had been standing at the long pier glass at the south end of the ballroom, with one gloved hand on the cold marble of the pier table beneath it, saw him last. He came down the room to her at the same perfectly unhurried pace with which he had once crossed the marble hall of Westbridge House in the morning light. He stopped 2 paces from her at the pier glass. He set the 2 folded letters on the pier table beside her hand. "Miss Hartwell." "Your Grace." "I have read your letter of the second post. I have come, with your aunt's permission, to give you mine." The whole of the south end of the ballroom, 8 couples, 2 dowagers, 3 of Lady Mainwaring's particular friends, Sir Henry Mainwaring on his way to the card room, was now, with the perfectly trained discretion of a London ballroom, watching them while pretending not to. Frederica did not look at the letters. She looked at his face. "Your Grace?" "Miss Hartwell. On the table beside your hand is the fair copy of the answer I wrote to the Earl of Linfield on the 4th of March. the morning after Garrett delivered to me the letter you heard read in Park Street this afternoon. I have also the Earl's acknowledgement of the 5th of March that no engagement exists between his house and mine. I should be obliged if you would read aloud, for me, one line of each, what is written there." She did not, for a moment, move her hand. She took up the first letter. She unfolded it. She read, in a small, clear, steady voice that perfectly carried to the 8 couples and the 2 dowagers and the 3 particular friends. "My brother's letter was the letter of a man preparing himself for a crossing, and no engagement, on any honourable construction of his words, exists or has ever existed between this house and the Earl's. Westbridge, 4th March." She set the letter down. She took up the second. She read, in the same small, clear, steady voice, "The matter is, on both sides, considered perfectly closed. Linfield, 5th March." She set the second letter down. She did not for a moment look up at him. "Miss Hartwell." "Your Grace." "Will you do me the honour of stepping into the library of this house for 5 minutes? Cecily Mannering is on her way at this moment to fetch your aunt from the card room. They shall meet us at the door of the library." Cecily Mannering, in fact, had already crossed the ballroom to the card room door. Mrs. Hartwell came out of the card room on Cecily's arm. They walked at a perfectly composed pace toward the door of the library at the southeast corner of Lord Wexford's house. The Duke of Westbridge offered Frederica Hartwell his arm at the pier glass. She did, after a small breath, take it. They walked through the 8 watching couples of the south end of the ballroom, and the 2 dowagers and the 3 particular friends, in perfectly composed silence, to the door of the library. Mrs. Hartwell and Cecily were already at the door. They went in. The door was closed behind them. The small library at Lord Wexford's was a low, quiet, panelled room, with 1 bow window opening on Berkeley Square. The candles had been lit. The fire was low. The bookcases ran from floor to ceiling on 3 walls. There was a single great soft Aubusson carpet in the centre of the floor. The Duke of Westbridge took Frederica Hartwell's hand at the centre of the carpet. He did not kneel. He did, however, turn slightly to face her, with her gloved hand in his. "Miss Hartwell, I have not, in 6 months, had the impertinence to want anything at all. I had been 6 months too busy being the Duke of Westbridge to be a man. I came into Park Street 3 weeks ago to ask only that you should let me know when, if ever, the day came that I might ask a question. I have not, in 3 weeks, had the courage. I shall ask it now. Your Grace, Miss Hartwell, will you marry me?" She looked at him in the soft, small candlelight. Her aunt stood by the bow window with her gloved hands folded. Cecily Mainwaring stood at the door, with her dark eyes very bright. "Your Grace, Miss Hartwell, I am asking. I should be very sorry to be told I have asked too late." "Your Grace, I had written you a letter this afternoon that—" "Your letter, Miss Hartwell, was the letter of a woman who had been read aloud in her own drawing room, a copy she should never have been read. None of it was your fault. I shall hold against myself that I had not warned you of every small private machinery in this city that might be set in motion against you. I shall hold against myself that I had to learn, by the second post of a Tuesday afternoon, how badly I had loved you, before I had said the word in your hearing." He did not, for a moment, say anything more. She did not, for a moment, say anything. "Your Grace, Miss Hartwell, I shall need you," she said quietly, "to learn to share an umbrella." "Miss Hartwell, I have begun." "You have not, in fact, begun." "Miss Hartwell, I have, on Sunday, in Kensington Gardens, very nearly begun." She laughed once, softly, and pressed her gloved fingers briefly against her mouth. "Your Grace," she said. "Yes." He raised her gloved hand. He pressed his mouth gravely to the inside of her gloved wrist, exactly above the ink-stained cuff she had been smoothing with her right thumb since the morning she had been 14. Mrs. Hartwell, who in 26 years had not embraced her niece, crossed the Aubusson carpet from the bow window in 3 perfectly composed paces and took her niece into her arms. Cecily Mainwaring closed the door of the library behind herself, so that none of the 8 couples, or 2 dowagers, or 3 particular friends at the south end of the ballroom should overhear the next half hour. It was the 2nd of September. Frederica walked up the Lime Avenue at Westbridge in a plain dark travelling gown of clean amber wool, with the soft autumn yellow of the limes turning above her, and the thrush in the corner copse singing clear in the bright afternoon. She carried, under one arm, a small, flat parcel wrapped in brown paper, and in her other hand, the new black silk umbrella he had given her in May. He met her at the iron gate at the south end of the Lime Avenue. He was hatless. He had on the plain dark green coat of a country gentleman who has not had a London call to make in 14 days. His tarnished bronze hair was dry and a little disordered by the September wind. He was looking, in the bright afternoon light, like a perfectly rested young man. He took the parcel from her. "What is this?" "It is the deed. The deed. For the 3-room shop in the back street behind the pump room at Bath. I have, my love, signed it this morning. I have signed it Lady Frederica Forster's circulating library. It shall open on the 14th by Michaelmas, as I promised you in May." He looked at the parcel for a long moment. He looked at her. "Miss Lady Forster." "Your Grace." "I had thought," he said, "that we should hang the deed in the front room, behind the lending desk, above the parrot." "You shall hang it where you please. You are the first subscriber." "You said I should have neither the Cooper nor the umbrella." "You shall," she said gravely, "have the umbrella. The Cooper is for the back room." He looked up at the soft yellow leaves of the Lime Avenue. He looked at the thrush in the corner copse. He looked at his wife of 7 weeks in her amber gown, on the gravel by the iron gate. "Frederica." "Adrian." "It looks," he said, "like rain." She looked at the high, clean September sky. She looked at the long Lime Avenue. She looked at the new black silk umbrella in her hand. "It does," she said. He opened the umbrella over them both. They walked, the brass tip catching the bright September sun, up the Lime Avenue together.